Welcome, wanderer. You found your way into the shadows. Here, stories are not just told, they breathe, they whisper, and they wait for you in the dark. Dim the lights, silence the world, and listen closely, because every story has a way of finding you. I lived in a haunted house for 5 years, and it was nothing like in the movies. I want to start off by pointing out a very obvious fact. There's a huge difference between real-life hauntings and the one that you see on the big screen. I don't mean just because the movie world is populated solely by good-looking people and riddled with every cliched trope in the book, but because movies like to tie things up in a neat little bow at the end. They might not always have good endings, but they always give you a reason for what's going on. A rotting corpse hidden behind the floorboards, an ancient burial ground discovered in the backyard, a long history of brutal murders in the house, a demonic heirloom of some sort. The list could go on. But that's not the case in the real world. At least it wasn't the case in my experience. My story starts a few weeks before I move into a new house and ends the day I moved out. Because, truth is, sometimes there are no answers to why a house is the way it is. I lived in what I believe to be a haunted house for 5 years, and these are my experiences. It started in 2000 when my parents sat my sister and I down to announce we were moving again. As an army brat, I was used to this conversation. We were told when we were moving and then shown a photo of the house. As an army brat of 2 retired army patients, however, I was a little confused as to why we suddenly had to move in the middle of my school year, but I didn't question it. As weird as it might seem to have people who lived in the same house all their lives, to my family, moving was the status quo. As was the case with every move, there was a part of me that hoped that this time would be the last time, and that we'd finally settle down into a permanent home. I didn't get off the hype train until I saw this house in person, and boy was I quick to jump off. Hurled myself right out of the window, really. For one thing, it was a rental property, which, in and of itself, meant it was temporary. But more importantly, the place looked like crap. I remember there being newspapers spread out on the floor in the middle of the kitchen, right under a yellowing, low-hanging light fixture, dripping water. My bedroom was painted black, and the previous tenant had scribbled poems about suicide on the walls in multicoloured crayons. Though I now find the thought of some emo kid doodling with wax crayons rather amusing, at the time I was royally creeped out. The stairs were creaky, the ceiling looked waterlogged, and the whole house was dusty as an attic. I couldn't believe this was the place my parents had picked. It wasn't as though we were poor and desperate. We were your average middle-class family. We were moving out of a lovely semi-detached home with our own swimming pool into this den of dirt and grime. And if all that wasn't bad enough, I found out the previous tenants had just up and left. They'd withheld rent for months, neglected the upkeep, then one day just disappeared, taking all of their stuff with them. The owner was never going to track them down. So yeah, we're off to a great start. Next time I saw the house was the day we moved in, and thankfully it looked much better. The owner had changed the leaky light fixture, cleaned up the dirt and applied a fresh coat of white paint throughout the house. The only room that still made me uncomfortable was the laundry room at the foot of the basement stairs. I'd get this really creepy crawly feeling whenever I'd go down. You know, like when you feel someone breathe down your neck but turn around and no one's there. It was bad enough that I usually dashed past the door whenever I went downstairs, and if I had to go inside, I'd use a leg to prop up the door, just in case. So yeah, aside from the laundry room, the house was fairly normal at first. Sure, I'd hear a few strange noises here and there, but they were just the sounds of the house settling, and water running through its pipes. It always takes a bit of time to adjust to a new home, but after a while, the cracking and snapping in the walls fades to background noise. They're just sounds you notice only when you're not familiar with the place. A flushing toilet, for instance, would wake me up in the middle of the night in the first couple of weeks, but after that, I could sleep easily through it. I think it's just survival instinct, our animal brains trying to keep us alert in a new environment when it's not sure where danger might lurk. If I had to pinpoint the exact moments when things changed, I'd say it happened one night a couple of months after we moved in, and long after I'd adapted to the sounds of the new house. Now, one thing that most people don't know about me is that I'm about as good as falling asleep as I am at playing the ukulele. And I can't play the ukulele. I go from wide awake to wide awake to wide awake to slightly drowsy to suddenly asleep. The process takes over an hour every night, no matter how exhausted I am or how late I go to bed. That night, like every other night, I went to bed at 10, expecting to fall asleep around 11. I wasn't sure exactly how long I'd been in bed for, but I was still awake when I heard a sound unlike the ones my brain had grown used to. A knock at my bedroom door. Along with that knock came a man's voice. "Are you asleep?" he asked. I turned over and replied, "No." He continued, "Let me in." "Dad?" I asked, eyes still closed. "Can I come in?" the voice asked. It didn't sound like my dad, but who else could it have been? "Okay," I replied. I heard quiet footsteps towards me, and then I felt something putting weight on the bed, kind of like a parent's hand as they lean in to give you a goodnight kiss. That's when I realised I hadn't heard the door opening. My eyes shot open and I saw someone standing over me. I can still remember him clearly. He had pitch black hair, a long crooked nose, an aging face, thick eyebrows, and a sorrowful scowl. I could see him so clearly as though my room had been lit up by a flash of lightning, even though there hadn't been so much as a cloud in the sky that night. The final detail I noticed before my eyes shot momentarily towards my lamp was the black raincoat he wore. By the time I flicked the light on and looked back, he was gone, and I was covered in sweat. My eyes wandered to the clock, 10 past 10. If it had been a dream, I had been asleep when it had happened, then it was the quickest I'd ever fallen asleep. That night marked the first of many strange occurrences. It was a hot summer day and I was hiding in the basement browsing the web. My first year of high school was over and I had committed to spending the summer vacation doing absolutely nothing. It was around 3:45 p.m. when I heard the front door opening. Just in time, I thought. It was obviously my dad getting home from work. He was a morning person and worked an earlier shift to avoid rush hour traffic. I headed up the stairs to say hello as I usually did. "Hey, Dad," I called out as I ran up the stairs. He didn't reply. I turned the corner and headed down the hallway leading to the entrance, but when I got there it was empty. The door was unlocked, so I knew he had come home. "Dad?" I shouted. There was this mirror between the front door and the garage door, and from that mirror you could see the hallway from where I'd just come, as well as a sliver of the stairs all the way up to the second floor. After calling for my dad another time, I caught a glimpse of his silhouette in the mirror. He was standing behind me in the hallway, which really isn't impossible to achieve. He would only have to circle round the living room, through the dining room and kitchen, then into the hallway where I stood. The only thing that was odd was how quietly he'd managed it. I turned around again and smiled. "Hey, how's your day?" In a split second, I realised the figure wasn't in the hallway but rather up the stairs, just an optical illusion. But an optical illusion didn't explain how my dad had avoided the familiar screech produced by the third step, the quintessential sound of someone going upstairs. That's when I realised something weird was going on. "Dad?" I asked again, but I couldn't help but lower my voice. No answer. The dark silhouette walked out of sight and towards my parents' room. Every single cell in my body was telling me to get out. All the warning bells were blaring. Danger, danger. But I didn't listen. I mean, I clearly saw a man in the house. I heard the front door, and it was exactly the time my dad usually came home. Aside from him ignoring my welcome, there was no reason for me to think something weird was happening, yet my body was telling me otherwise. I ran up the stairs to the second floor and peeked into my parents' room, where I saw the silhouette of a hand pulling away from their dresser and towards their walk-in closet. I'm honestly not sure why the hand was what did it for me, but it was the push I needed for my brain to catch up to whatever danger signals my body was sending out. I just remember going from thinking, Dad, to realising, burglar? I mean, it's such a weird thing, right? Just a hand. It's not like I'd be able to recognise my dad's hand if you showed it to me in a lineup of random hand photos. I'd probably think you're a little weird for having a bunch of photos of hands to try and make the experiment in the first place, but that's not the point. The point is, I didn't feel safe anymore. I backed away quickly into my room and reached for one of my many decorative swords. Decorative, but sharp. I unsheathed the weapon and closed the door slowly, careful not to make too much noise. It was a fight or flight situation, and by gosh, I was going to fight. It seemed absurd to me now that my reaction wasn't to call 911, but then again, this happened before every other kid had a cell phone in their pouch, and only a landline upstairs was in my parents' room. It's not like I could have waltzed in there and made the call without getting caught. So instead, I stood in my room, hands trembling, and I waited and I listened. I could hear his footsteps up and down the hall, followed by a slightly muffled voice. There were pauses in between, as though the person was waiting for a reply, but not a reply from me. A reply from someone on the phone, I suppose. I strained my ears, but I couldn't for the life of me make out what they were saying. Who was he talking to? Did he know where I was? I shouldn't have called out so many times. Obviously he knew he wasn't alone in the house. Would he come after me? My heart pounded in my chest and thumped in my ears. I could feel adrenaline surging through me. But as stupid as I wasn't stupid enough to move. It was safer to stay where I was and wait. My real dad would be home soon, I figured. But then everything went quiet. I slowly approached my bedroom door and listened carefully, but the voice was gone and the footsteps had stopped. It was as though the house was empty again. Just to be sure, I waited longer, and by gosh, it felt like forever. At least in teenage time it did. Unsure of what to do, I opened the door a crack and looked out into the hall. If I'd been in a horror movie, that would have been the moment when something would have suddenly jumped out in front of the door. But nothing happened. I came out of my hiding spot and slowly went room to room, opening every door, looking for whoever had broken in. Again, this was a very stupid thing to do, and I should have run out and called the cops. But we all know teenagers don't make the best life decisions, and I wasn't immune to teenage bravado. Luckily for me, my continued existence in the universe, all the rooms were emptied. Confused and rattled, I sat at my computer and kept my sword on my lap until the door opened 20 minutes later and my dad called my name. I ran upstairs with my sword, and he gave me that weird look dads give you when they catch you doing something not quite your age. He probably thought I was playing make-believe or something. Long story short, he'd gotten caught in traffic. I told him about the burglar, and we went from room to room, checking each one. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and nothing had been taken. And honestly, to this day, I'm not sure whether that was a relief or somehow more frightening. I know what I saw that day. I know someone was in the house, because, after all, if my dad hadn't unlocked the front door, then who had? My house wasn't the only place where weird things happened. There was something eerie about the whole neighbourhood. When my friend came over, we'd test out the teenage bravado I was telling you about earlier by taking nighttime walks in the woods close to my house. My friends would take turns clinging to my arms and yelping whenever something made a sound. They said they felt safe around me. I don't know if it was because I had that really secure air to me or because I told them about the weird things I'd experienced and survived in my house. One night, my friend and I were walking back to my place after skating at the park. We used this shortcut behind an outdoor mall. a dimly lit path that connected the main road to the residential area. Even though it looked kind of creepy, it was by no means unsafe. Barely 25 metres long, the path was hardly the kind of place a psycho killer would go to stalk his prey. As we started walking down the snowy path, I stopped for a second and looked up at the sky. It was pitch black, with neither a single cloud nor the flicker of a star anywhere in sight. For some reason, it struck me as really odd. I felt that tingling sensation at the back of my spine I'd get whenever I walked by the laundry room. "Weird, it's too dark," I said. Almost as soon as the words left my mouth, there came a gust of wind so strong it dislodged a massive icicle hanging from a tree about 20 metres ahead of us. And when I say massive, I mean it was a couple of feet long and sharp as a knife. You know how they get warnings for ice falling around buildings nowadays because that shit is dangerous? Well, imagine this icicle being 3 times bigger than the ones you're supposed to watch out for. Now imagine it was out for goddamn blood like some shitty B-list movie. See, this thing didn't gracefully drop to the ground. It defied gravity and made a beeline for my friend and I. She shrieked and grabbed me so tightly she nearly knocked the wind out of me. We're both frozen as this thing, easily capable of impaling us through our winter coats, came hurtling towards us so quickly we couldn't run even if we wanted to. Then, just as it arrived within 2 feet of us, about the distance of my personal bubble, it banked sharply to the right and stabbed to the ground like an arrow. I swear I'm not making this up. My friend still talks about this to this day. One second the icicle was coming at us, the next it did an abrupt 90-degree turn. Hell, if I didn't know any better, I'd have sworn I saw it deflecting off of something. I have a photographic memory, and whenever I think back to that night, I can sort of see something there in front of us, like the sheen on a window or something. Then, for a brief moment, as we were trying to catch our breath, I saw the man in a black coat standing under the tree. Just standing and staring at us. I felt my stomach turn, and I looked at my friend. She was still looking at the icicle in the snow. By the time I looked at the tree again, the guy was gone. Sometimes weird things would happen to the house itself. Whilst I was the only one in the family to actually see a man in a black coat hanging around, everyone could see things appearing on the walls. More specifically, one day, just out of the blue, I noticed something near the light switch at the foot of the basement stairs. Yes, close to the laundry room, but on the opposite wall. It looked like a bloody handprint, except drawn in crayon. I'm not saying my sister and I were perfect little angels, but we were very well behaved, and neither of us would have done something like this. Partially because we respected people's property, partially because our mum would have made us clean it up, no matter how long it took to scrub it off. I definitely remember the detailed conversation about drawing on walls and how we could do it if we wanted to, but she didn't know any easier tips to get crayon off the wall, and she wouldn't help us clean it if we embraced our inner artist. "And mark my words, you will clean it," she said back then, with the threatening sternness of a mother. That's how I knew my sister hadn't drawn the handprint. That's why I dragged her downstairs to show her. "This wasn't here before, was it?" I asked. I mean, it was possible it had been there all along, and I just never noticed. My sister ran a hand over it curiously. I remember how much bigger the handprint was compared to her hand. The fingers were thicker and longer, as though belonging to a fully grown man. I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. "No, it wasn't," she said. She looked as creeped out by the mark as I was, but I still had to ask, "Did you draw it?" "No," she replied. "Wasn't your room covered in crayon before we moved in?" I nodded. "Yeah, you can still see the colour when the paint gets scratched." She rubbed her hand against the handprint again. "That's probably what happened here. The paint wore off or something." "Yeah." That would have been the end of it if we hadn't gone to our computers and noticed a dent in the wall. A dent that looked like a goddamn skull. A fist-sized skull, but a skull nonetheless. We saw it at the same time and gave each other a conspirational look. Maybe that dent had always been there. Maybe we only noticed it because we were a little on edge about the eerie handprint. That's really creepy, right? She said. Yeah. This was the first time anyone in the family had seen proof of bizarre things that happened in the house. As for my mum, she didn't seem all that bothered by the hand or the dent. She didn't even make us wash it up. And now we come back to the topic of teenage bravado. When you're a teenager in a group of peers, you'll eventually get to the point where you stupidly want to test your bravery by going somewhere creepy and see who cracks first. My friends and I had already conquered the woods, so naturally we had to up the ante. This is where my laundry room came in. See, I wasn't the only person freaked out by the laundry room. Without ever mentioning it to my friends, every single one of them had told me they felt something weird about it. I mean, yeah, they knew I'd seen creepy shit around the house, but I never told them how the laundry room in particular made me feel uneasy. Unlike the rest of the house, it was unfinished. It had a hard cement floor instead of carpet, an incomplete ceiling, and exposed wall studs, with pink insulation ripe and ready to be picked like cotton candy. Maybe those factors contributed to the overall creep factor of the room. I don't know. At some point, someone decided it'd be a good idea to lock ourselves in the laundry room, turn off the lights, and see what would happen. And that's exactly what we did, because we were dumb teenagers looking for a cheap thrill. We packed ourselves into the room, all 5 of us. Honestly, I'm not even sure how we all fit in. That's how small the room was. We huddled together, and I gave everyone a final warning before I shut the door and turned the lights off. We were quiet at first, but within a minute, I felt my friend's grip tightening around my arm. Then all of a sudden she shouted, "Something just touched my leg." There were a few laughs, but no one admitted to grabbing her. The laughter subsided when I felt a sort of strange tension in the room. Maybe, one by one, we all realized we hadn't been the ones to touch her. "I want out," said another friend. That was enough for me. My instincts were already going haywire. They had been from the moment I'd shut the door. I swatted my arm towards the light switch but felt a void in its place. I pawed around blindly, expecting to feel the wall or the insulation, but my hand didn't connect with anything. Now, even though I avoided the laundry room, I'd still been in there enough times to know exactly where the light switch was. Even if I didn't, there was enough wall in that room for me to not touch the wall when I swung my arm. "Something's got my leg," shrieked my friend, a note of panic in her voice. "It's not me," said another. "I'm not touching anyone," answered a third. A fourth voice replied with, "I'm not even near her." I was the only other person there, and I knew that I hadn't grabbed her leg. I tried for the doorknob, but just like the light switch, I couldn't find it. I felt as though the room had taken on a completely different set of proportions. I don't know any other way to describe it. You know that feeling when you miss a step, or when you think there's one more step than there actually is? It was kind of like that. It made no sense. The room was small and narrow. Even if I missed the mark, I should hit the wall. And if I was facing the wrong side somehow, then my hand would have connected with the washer, but it didn't. Then I finally, just as I heard one of them shriek, I felt a cold metal doorknob and swung the door open. We ran out of the laundry room so fast we could have outrun Sonic. My friend, the one who said something had grabbed her, pointed to the laundry room. "Did you see him?" she screamed. "See who?" asked one of the guys. When the door opened, there was a man standing in the corner of the room. She shrieked. I nervously popped my head into the laundry room, turned the light on and looked inside, but the room was empty. We spent the rest of the evening hiding out in the living room. My friends never went in the laundry room again after that night. The last incident that happened wasn't quite as spectacular, but it was just as puzzling as everything else. I was about to start my final year of high school when my parents announced we were moving again. I was actually pretty upset about it. For all its faults and creepiness, the house had become my home. We'd been living there for 5 years, 5 whole years, the longest I'd ever stayed in a single place, and now we were leaving. With just a few months left on this lease, this happened. It was almost noon, and my sister and I were off school for the summer. I was reheating a meal in the microwave, and my sister came down the stairs and looked at me with a frazzled expression on her face. "I have a weird question. Would you mind counting my library books?" she asked. I checked the microwave. It still had a few minutes to go. "Sure, but why?" I replied as I followed her towards the stairs. "I need to return them today, so I counted to make sure I had all of them, and I did, but then I turned around to get my bag, and when I turned around, one of the books was missing. I counted to make sure, and sure enough, I was one short." "Did it fall under your bed?" I asked. "I checked and it wasn't there. I recounted to make sure, and suddenly I had all my books back again," she explained. "Okay." She continued, "But then I triple-checked because when I counted I didn't see the book that was missing, and I'm definitely short by one. It's not in that pile. Can you just count and tell me if I have all 21? When we got to her room, she looked surprised. She pointed to a book at the top of her pile. "There it is." I turned on my heels. "Guess my work here is done." "Can you just count, just in case?" she asked. With a shrug, I knelt down and counted all the books one by one. 21. You've got them all." "Phew, thanks," she answered. I headed back downstairs just as the microwave stopped, but weirdly enough, it started up again, making 3 minutes on its timer. I figured it was some kind of electrical glitch and stopped it manually so I could eat. For the record, that was the only time the microwave ever did that. After lunch, my sister and I headed to the basement to play video games together. As I turned the corner, I saw something gleaming on the floor, the sofa, and table. "What's that?" I asked. I don't know why, but my first thought was ice. As I moved closer, I realised it was glass. My sister and I stood there for a second and looked at the mess. "Where did that come from?" she asked. That's when we noticed the light fixture on the ceiling. The circular light shade was missing. "How the hell?" I whispered. From what I could gather, the light shade had broken somehow, but not in a way that could explain the mess. See, because there were shards on the table, on the sofa, and I figured it must have exploded while on the ceiling and showered down. The problem was, if it had broken in the air, then the metal ring screwing it in place would have been up there, would probably have had a few pieces of glass still hanging from it. The ring, however, was on the floor, which meant the light fixture had fallen straight down, in the large gap between the sofa and the table. But then how had the glass gotten back up on the table and the sofa? How hadn't we heard the thick glass lampshade break? My sister and I both thought it was really weird, but we cleaned up the mess and explained the situation to our parents the best we could. Mum wasn't mad. She told us there must have been an air bubble in the glass that caused it to explode. That didn't explain the ring being on the floor, but hey, at least she wasn't blaming us for the mess. That was the last thing I experienced in this house. I think it was a sort of sick goodbye message from the entity I'd seen so many times. We moved about a month or two later. In the years since, I've often wondered about the house, and if its next tenants experienced anything similar. I know it had changed hands quite a few times. People move in and out every couple of years or so, I've been told by a neighbour I've been staying in touch with. I've also wondered about the family that lived there before us. Wondered if they'd left the house because they, too, had seen the man in black coat, or if their departure was unrelated. I'll probably never know why the hell the house was haunted. It was barely 25 years old, hardly old enough for something to have happened to it without there being any information about it in the news. All I know is that something was seriously messed up with it. I live alone now, in a nice, safe condo, and I haven't experienced anything weird since my family moved out of that house. And so another story slips back into the shadows. If it followed you home, don't blame me. Some tales linger with us. If you enjoyed wandering in the dark with me tonight, make sure to subscribe, share the fear, and return for more. Until then, keep your doors locked, trust no whisper in the dark, and remember, the next story might be yours.